I'm Keegan Davids, and this is my story. I am a young man. I'm not actually young anymore. I can't call myself that. I think I'm struggling with my age, if I'm honest. But I'm from Cape Town, and that's important for me. That's my location. It's where I learned how to be a human being, where I learned faith and discovered God. And so Cape Town's a very contested city, but it's also the place that I have learned how to navigate my faith. So it's a particularly important place for me. My journey started, I guess, before I was even born. My parents, they are like some heroes to me. They came to faith a few years before I was born, and so when I was born into this new adventure that they were on. And so that's where my journey started. And the things I know about faith and life, a lot of those foundational things I learned through the life of my parents. What it means to be in community, this relationship that God calls us into, all of those things I learned over there. So I would say that I was actually discipled into faith from when I was born. Yeah, I can think of two. One was quite a impactful event for me, I guess. When I was maybe 17, it's quite a personal story. I discovered that I had another brother, which I didn't know I had before. I grew up. There was two of us, and my dad was my hero. And when I was 17, my parents were away in Makanda, and my dad was at seminary. And I had a really close group of friends. And one of them, like, stories started to sort of swirl at the time, and then things came to a halt, and I found out that one of them was actually my biological brother. It was a very strange way of finding this out, but I was, well, at least it was a rumor, and then I confronted my parents about it. And then stories started to emerge that there were possibilities that, that this was true. And I think months later, it came out that I have an older brother, and it was devastating for me. Because I think I held my parents in particular regard, especially my dad. My dad was like the person I looked up to, like when I think about faith and fatherhood and what it means to follow Jesus, like he was this person. He was probably on this pedestal for me and my hero. And my whole world, I think, came crashing down that time. I struggled with faith for a bit. I was angry at my dad. I was angry at the world. I was angry at God. I was angry at my mom for not even telling me, about this. And I think I probably need to give more context, but so my dad was in a relationship with somebody prior to being married to my mom, and that's when, and back in the day, this is like, 38 years ago, paternity tests and these kind of things weren't easy to come by, I guess. And so when the story came out, my dad and his mother at the time, a grandmother, approached his girlfriend, and they sort of wanted to take responsibility for what happened, but they said no, this is not his son, and that was the end of the story, I guess. The strange thing is we grew up together, as friends, him and I, and years later we find out that actually he is my older brother. And so, yeah, it was hard for me, but I think I learned a lot of lessons in that time. I learned to lean on God more. I learned to forgive. Oh my goodness, like if ever I had to learn what forgiveness meant, it was during that journey to forgive. I learned that forgiveness actually sets me free, that actually when I don't forgive, that I'm held bound to a story about myself that's not true. I'm held hostage to this event, to the pain and to the suffering, but actually that forgiveness is part of what releases me and allows me to be free to follow this liberty that I experience in Jesus. And I learned about reconciliation and redemption through the story. My dad and I are super tight now, and I thank God for that. He's also a really gracious and repentant and humble man, and even for that action, he's still very, very important to me, and I hold him in high regard for the way in which he dealt with that, yeah. So, yeah. Wow, that's a big question. So I said I grew up in a Christian home. My parents are still today like really like Christian, like followers of Jesus that I look up to. You know, I'm really inspired by their faith journey, their generosity, their kindness, the way in which their faith makes sense in the places that they find themselves. I'm deeply encouraged by that and inspired. But I think I was 16 years old when my faith made sense to me for the first time. I always had this idea that because my parents had a strong faith that I would end up inheriting eternal life based on their account, you know. And I had a very harsh awakening one Sunday sitting in the church service, and there was a guy sharing a story about some of the similar ideologies that he had, and I just felt God speaking to me clearly, like He's like you have to own this journey with me. Like it's not about your parents in one sense. And so I was 16 when I wrestled with God and decided to surrender my life to Jesus. And I don't know if things went right. I think even after I committed my life to the Lord, like I still lived I was 16, I still lived a life that maybe wasn't great. You know, I was in a relationship with my current wife now, and I wasn't a very good boyfriend, for example, you know. And so I think I was still wrestling with my human nature, my humanity, which I still am, obviously, right? But I don't think that things went right for me after I followed Jesus. I just think that I was more aware of God's grace and God's presence in my life. And I'm thankful for that, because someone like my wife she was teaching me so much, even when we were young, about what it meant to follow Jesus without even knowing. And so I would say that what happened in my journey of faith was that God had allowed me to understand His grace to grow and to mature to the place I am today. Wow, tough question. Would I be okay with nothing but God and only God? I mean, I want to say I would be, right? Because that's the right answer. But I don't know. I don't know if I would be okay with that. That's so odd. Yeah, I don't actually have an answer to that question. I want to be okay with only God. But the frivolity of this world and the place I find myself in makes that a really difficult question to answer. Yeah, tough one. To love people. Yeah, God's definitely called me to love people. I think it's the thing that energizes me the most in this world. It's the thing that wakes me up at night. It's the thing that keeps me from my sleep. I think when people are in pain, I feel it. When people are unhappy, I sense it. I really love people a lot. Like this time of lockdown has been really difficult for me. And I've had to mourn the loss of like friendships and relationships and presence and time with people. Yeah, so I think that the thing that I'm called to in this world is to love people with all that I am. Yeah, with all the strength and the love that God has given me. You can do it. I wasn't a very confident child, teenager. I had a lot of self-doubt, and I was bullied. Wasn't as strong as the other people physically, and so I just had a lot of insecurities. I struggled, you know. I actually the earlier question about what happened since you came to faith, like I think God gave me confidence. I didn't have that before. Like I don't think that as a 12-year-old child that I would be 35 doing the things that I've done over the last how many years. Like I don't think that was even part of my paradigm. So I think my advice is you can do it. Like God has given you everything to be able to do it. yeah, I think I've shared one story of the journey that, my family was on, my dad and I. I think that was a really impactful journey for me. And I think another turning point for me was, like I said, my wife and I, so Lindsay and I, we are together for 20 years this year. I've only married for 8, dated for almost 12 years. Knew each other since we were 14. And that relationship wasn't always roses. And it was really hard at one stage in our relationship because, like I said, I wasn't a really good boyfriend. But the thing that was a turning point for me is I one day went to Lindsay and confessed that I was not a nice person. And the first thing Lindsay did was forgive me before she asked any questions, before we processed what I had shared with her, before she told me, before she, rebuked me, which she should have in the first place. She first forgave me. And I think that has changed my life, really. It's helped me to understand that as a follower of Jesus, like, God calls me to forgive first. Like, it's such a radical thing, I think, And I'm not saying that God's not calling us to sort stuff out, that God's not calling us to call out injustice, that God's not calling us to call out pain. That's not what I'm saying. But what she did there was she taught me that God called me to forgive first before I did those other things. It changed the trajectory of that whole experience. It changed like where the relationship ended up. It changed the person I became, really, if I'm honest. Forgive first. Yeah, so those were 2 impactful things in my life. To love each other. Oh my goodness, during Lent, I'm always reminded that it was the kindness of God, the goodness of God that led us to repentance. The kindness, the goodness. And I just think that sometimes as a body of people, we are very unkind with each other. We are unkind with the world sometimes. We are unkind with those who are not like us. And I really just want to encourage all of us, including myself, to be able to learn to practice love and kindness and mercy and generosity. Like, it's those things, I think, that will change societies, communities, family lives, and invite people into relationship with Him because we are kind, because we are good. Because it's the goodness of God that led us to repentance. Yeah. My name is Keegan Davids, and this was my story.